Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Pat Michael. I'm a volunteer with the Middletown Historical Society in Middletown, Delaware. I'm going to be interviewing you this morning. I'm also here with Keith Schneider, who's our videographer, and we're here at the Middletown Community Library in Middletown, Delaware. We're here to interview Carolyn Davis, who is a longtime Middletown resident, and this is for the Historical Society to document from memories the change in our little town over the past, since the beginning of the 1900s. So we'll get started with some questions. Smile, be nice. Don't be afraid to talk. So what's your full name and where were you born?
My full name is Carolyn Louise Schaefer Davis, and I was born in Wilmington, Delaware General Hospital, but I've lived in the Middletown area for all my life, with the exception of 2 years. When we were first married, we lived in an apartment in Newark, but for the most part, been here my entire life.
And you were born in what year?
1950.
1950, okay. How did your whole family come to live here when you moved here originally?
Well, my parents and grandparents had moved back here. They were born, my grandparents were born in Odessa, Delaware, and both of them lived on High Street. But at one point in the early 1900s, they moved to Marcus Hook to work at my grandfather worked at the Visco factory there in Marcus Hook. In 1938, they had the hope of coming back home to Delaware, so they bought a property in Mount Pleasant, which is about 4 miles north of Middletown, and it was originally the post office and a little store in a Georgian style home. They had it moved so that it would face what was then called 896. It's now Summit Bridge Road. And so my mother was 16 years old when they moved back to this area. Actually, my grandmother's family goes back further than that, probably 11 generations in the area. And when it was referred to as Appoquinimink Hundred, and that changed in the mid-1870s. So I realized that they were in what's now referred to as Blackbird Hundred. So we were able to trace that back to the 1600s. So.
Good. I want to hear more about that a little bit, but that's something we need to hear about.
Yeah.
Is all of your family here? Sisters, brothers?
My brother still lives about a mile from where we grew up, across from the Summit Aviation Airport now. My sister moved on when she got married. She's lived in several states. She traveled more than all the rest of us, and she now lives in Rhode Island with her family.
Okay. What was the house that you lived in like? Like how many rooms? Did it have electricity? Did it have running water? And that might seem like silly questions today, but back in the day.
That's a good question,
yes.
Because we did have running water and all those conveniences. We did not have heat as we know it today. We had central heat. It was called a pipeless heater. So so our upstairs was not heated. So many times in the winter, we would come in and get dressed by the living room where the heater came up from the floor. Mm-hmm. Now, my paternal grandparents lived down in Blackbird, and they did not have running water or indoor bathroom facilities. So it was always fun to go there in the summertime and have that experience of getting a bath in the kitchen, heating the water on the wood stove.
And going to the bathroom outside.
And going to the bathroom outside, yes, especially at night.
Mm. Describe your earliest childhood memory, good or bad.
Oh, I can't think what the first memory would be, but my memories are, I guess I just thought everybody was like us, living in a home that a general store is one of your rooms. And we were allowed to go into the store as long as we could be well behaved when the customers would come in. And
what was the name of the store?
It was Thornton's store. It was my maternal grandparents' store. And it was the Facebook before there was such a thing, because the farmers, it was a rural community, and the farmers would come in and to buy whatever their wives needed as far as food was concerned, and that. But then they would congregate to solve all the world's problems there. We didn't have a potbelly stove and checkers, but it was just one level above that.
I remember those days. What kind of games did you play growing up, and who did you play with?
Well, we just played with our siblings, but we did play a lot outdoors. When families would come to do their grocery shopping, if they had children, we were allowed to play out in the backyard, and if we had a fenced-in yard, and so we had a lot of adventures with that. And I just really remember my dad, we lived on 6.5 acres, so when my parents got married, my dad's heart was really in farming. So on that 6.5 acres, he had a large garden that he would go around to the neighborhoods in Middletown to sell the produce and that. And he also had cows there, and he shipped milk to Pet Milk Company. And you wouldn't expect that on such a small property. And he had tractors and corn picker and those things, but he used our horse to plow the garden. So many times people would stop by thinking we were Amish when we weren't.
It's just the way it was done.
It was just the way it was done. Mm-hmm.
Did you enjoy growing up that way?
Oh, absolutely. I just think that my husband and I were so blessed. We had what would be referred to nowadays as working mothers, but we were right home with them. My mother was in the store, waiting on customers, and we were able to be right there with her. And my husband grew up on a farm, and his mother was right out in the fields driving the tractors and milking the cows together. And so it was just wonderful to grow up, to be able to be with our parents while they were working.
And the milk and the cows are referred to, was it the machinery that you bring the cows in and that machine milks them, or
Okay.
what was the process?
With my in-laws, they had milking machines where you hook them on. They're not automatic like they are now, and that. But my dad did all his milking by hand, and that was an experience. The strength that you could always tell when you shook hands with someone if they milked cows. They had, and of course we always had a lot of fun, doing that too.
And it's an all-year job. So you have to go out when it's cold?
Yes, 24/7, and literally 24/7. You have to be there every day.
For the animals and the work.
Mm-hmm.
What was your favorite thing to do when you were growing up? Go to the movies, go to the beach?
We did not have vacations. When I was growing up, it was the fun was just right there at home, and people get amused that I say my favorite toy was an ironing board, but I used to just like to mimic the things that my grandmother did and spent so much time, and I think that's why I have a heart for oral history, because we would just talk. By the time I was 7 years old, my favorite thing to do was to dry the dishes for her, and just to hear her stories. And I just wish that now I had asked her more questions, to go more in depth about some of those stories.
Which side of your family was the long-term, have been here for 11 generations? Was it your mother's?
My mother's, yes. It was through my maternal grandmother.
Okay.
Yes.
Where'd you go to school?
Middletown for the all 12 years. We didn't have kindergarten. Back then, I guess there were paid kindergartens, but we didn't go. Our before school, it was Sunday school, so we went to Sunday school. But then at 6 years old, started first grade, and it was all on South Broad, where it's now the Everett Meredith Middle School, but all 12 grades were there. And so we're, I guess now 4 generations. It was my mother graduated from Middletown High School in 1940, and then myself and my siblings graduated from there, and our children have graduated from there, and now we have grandchildren, but our younger son was the last one to graduate from the Middletown High School that was located on South Broad.
So what were the schools like growing up? I know at the beginning it was what you just described, everybody in one building. Over time, since you've had 4 generations,
Yes.
how can you describe for us?
So our sons were the first ones that had to go to, well, actually my sister went to Reading Middle for her like what would be now, back then it was junior high school, now it's called middle school. So after the integration and then the Lewis Reading school, that was originally for, as they referred to it back then, Negroes. Well, once we desegregation came around, then that became a middle school. And so my sister, who was born in 1954, was part of that. And then when our children came along, they by then they were building some more schools. So our boys went to Silver Lake Elementary and then Reading Middle School, which was the original high school there, and then on to Middletown High School. So we've just seen, now we're up to 3 high schools and they're building a 4th at the current time.
Did you like going to school? What were your best subjects, your worst subjects?
I got past not liking to go. In 2nd grade, I think it was, that I just I was ready to not go to school. But I think that was the year that my maternal grandfather passed away, so there was a lot going on at home. But other than that, 3rd grade, it was just a complete turnaround. We had a wonderful teacher, and we were actually, our class was in with a 4th grade class, so it was kind of going back to the one room thing of having 2 classes in the same classroom, and it was an experimental thing, but it was a joy. So yeah, I enjoyed it overall in high school. Yeah.
What was your favorite subject?
I guess algebra would have been, and I always liked math, but then I loved U.S. history.
Did you go to college?
Yes, I went to Goldie Beacom and took the accounting program there, Accounting and Business Administration, which was a 2-year course. So, and I went from there, finished my courses in January, so it was like a year and a half. I was able to finish the 2-year program in a year and a half, and finished on a Friday and went to Hercules on Monday morning.
So that's where you worked?
So that's where I worked until our oldest son was born.
And what is Hercules?
Hercules was a powder company back in the war, and but they expanded and they had chemicals and just a lot of different areas. I didn't know a lot of the products. I worked in disbursements, so paid the bills for a lot of the plants that were out in different states.
Did you have to travel to go to work?
No. Well, yeah, I communed from Mount Pleasant, and then after we were married, well, it was a little bit closer. The 2 years we lived at the apartment, and then when we moved back down here, yeah.
Did you have your own car?
Yeah, my parents gave me their 1960 car when I went to Goldie Beacom, and so I had that. But then I would carpool once, we were married and living down here. I would carpool with others.
What were the fads while you were young? Popular hairstyles, clothes, music?
Oh, that's a tough one. We always used to watch American Bandstand, and actually some of the people from Middletown that I remember, it was always exciting to see someone you knew that had gone there. So always loved watching that and on the TV. Yeah,
You had a TV?
Well, actually,
did you have a color TV?
Well, our first, I don't remember life without TV, but I'm told that they got their first one in 1951, so I was a year old when TV came into the home. I can remember my grandfather taking the time to watch the World Series when I was about 5 years old. That was a memorable thing. His uncle came to watch the World Series with him, and if my son was here, he would tell you exactly what the teams were and who the players were. But we got our first color TV in 1967, so I was still in high school when we got color television. Yeah.
And so what was your favorite song? Do you remember when you were in high school what your favorite song?
I really can't. I just, we used to have sock hops. Actually, the Ellis, I can't think, Ellis LaCrome, I think, was one of the principals at the high school, and the gymnasium was named after him. They built a new gymnasium while I was attending Middletown School, and we would have to have sock hops because no shoes were, other than basketball players, I guess, were to have shoes on that new hardwood floor there in the gymnasium.
Did a lot of kids go to the sock hops from around?
Yeah, I would say so. It was interesting because back when we went to school, you had your walkers, who people that lived right in the downtown Middletown, I'll say, and then there were the ones that bus riders that lived out on the farms and like the villages, like where I was in Mount Pleasant and that. So it was, not like we didn't have developments and subdivisions and all those things back then. You were either a walker and lived right in the immediate Middletown area, and
or a farmer like you.
Yes.
What did you usually do on Sundays? Did you go to church? Where did you go to
Yes.
church?
Well, I went to church at Summit, and we went to Sunday school. But my parents had the store, and it was open half a day, and back then stores weren't open like they are now. Even a lot of restaurants, I guess, weren't open back then. That's one thing. We never really ate out. As far as a restaurant, my first time that I remember eating in a restaurant, I was probably 10 or 11 years old when we took a day trip to Lancaster. And another time, my grandmother had a sister who was never married, and she was a social worker, was a nurse in Philadelphia, but she had taken a job down in Cape May, New Jersey. So I can remember it vividly. It was the day after the 4th of July. We went to visit Aunt Lola, and so we went to Cape May, and my mother wanted us to see the Steel Pier in Atlantic City, so we stopped there on the way home and didn't get home to after midnight. That was our vacation, that one-time vacation. Not like nowadays where folks, are going on several vacations a year or go spend a week at the beach. But I remember being on the Steel Pier, and Paul Anka was there. I say, and I don't remember songs, but that was an impression. And so it was so long we had to eat. So I can remember having a basket of chicken sitting there on the Steel Pier, and that was one of the few times we had ever eaten out. And now I think about all these restaurants around Middletown.
Just for a minute, talk about the churches in Middletown, how that all has changed. For example, there were few, years ago when we were kids, but
Right. I'm just trying to think. I mean, there was a transition as far as my mother. I remember that my grandmother lived right across the street from the Methodist Church on High Street, and I remember her talking about going there 3 times a day. My great-grandmother died when my grandmother was only 8 years old, and her dad was left with 3 daughters to raise. And my grandmother said that people would comment that Lemuel Harris always saw to it that his girls were in the church, and they would go in the morning for worship, in the afternoon for Sunday school, and back in the evening for evening service. And when my mother was growing up, her paternal grandparents were still there in Odessa, and she had cousins. So she would come from Marcus Hook to spend the summer. And they would go to the Methodist Church in the morning, and then they would go to the Presbyterian Church, which is now where the Methodist Church is on Main Street in Odessa. And there was a Presbyterian church there, and they would go there in the afternoon for Sunday school. when I came along, we would, go to Summit, to Sunday school, and then when we got old enough, we could go to the worship service. So we were still used to a rural, environment that way. And of course, as things have grown, I think, I didn't know a lot about the Catholic Church, its history here, but I do know that the congregation grew a lot when farmers moved to this area from Long Island and other places, and they bought potato farms and, and I always like going to school. I sat next to a boy that went to the Catholic Church, and I learned then that, during Lent or certain times, they did not eat fish on Friday, so they had to have special menus at the school cafeteria to accommodate, that. So, and then we did have some Jewish families as well, and there was a store on Main Street, and it's been torn down since, but it's near where I guess it's a little restaurant there on the corner now. It used to be McNaughton's Pharmacy, and behind that there was a store called Berkman's, and the Berkman family were a Jewish family. And on Broad Street, North Broad, there was a store where Jazzercise is now, at the current time, was Sadov's store. So those Jewish families, the Sadovs, my mother graduated with Minerva, and she had been affected with polio, and she would work at the family store. It was a little clothing store. It wasn't a variety store like Berkman's had more variety at their store. But Minerva and her mother would always make matzah at Passover time, and would always send some up to Mount Pleasant to my mother because they had become friends, going to school together. And then when I was in the split section in 3rd and 4th grade, the Berkman son, they had only had one son, Jay, and his mother had the class over for a picnic. Well, they lived in town, so we got to be walkers for one day and go to the Berkmans to have this picnic. And there's a little side note that about the Berkmans. My grandmother, her maiden name was Harris, and she had a cousin that married Miriam Berkman. So she became a Harris. And ironically, the Berkmans had a brother that was Harris Berkman. So they got into business together and opened, by then there were cars on the road, so they opened a service station, and it's now called, people that have lived here all their lives know it as H&H, and it's where Route 13 and Summit Bridge Road intersect south of Middletown. And so that's how it got the name H&H.
I didn't know that. Were you ever mentioned in the newspaper or other publications?
My brother just recently reminded me that in 2011, they did an interview when they had the 150th anniversary for Middletown, and somewhere along the line, someone asked me, what I thought about all the changes here, and I said I felt overwhelmed. Well, that's been, how many years ago now? 15,
I don't know,
guess.
15
yeah,
or 20.
Yeah, right. Well,
So
that was an understatement.
I know. So you're somebody famous. What world events had the most impact on you while you were growing up? Did any of them personally affect your family? World events like war or sports or...
Right. Well, I guess, 9/11 would be the most memorable thing, I would think, but we didn't have, a family member affected by it. I consider, history, like my dad served in the Philippines in World War II. And I just wonder, as I've seen, some of the soldiers come back from other wars, and, it's so much more talked about nowadays, the effects of war on people.
Did you see how it affected your dad? Did he?
Yes, I really do. But World War II veterans, it's just so different, I think, than nowadays. That there's more help or more openness about how war affects our loved ones. There was one, while I was in high school, Bill Baker, after high school, was in the Vietnam War, and he didn't come home. He lost his life in that war, so he was in the class of 1965, and they were neighbors to us.
Tell me about holidays, how your family celebrated holidays, birthdays, Christmas, Easter, whatever holiday.
Well, birthdays were just another day. If we might get to choose what birthday cake, our parents would make us a birthday cake and that, but like maybe make our favorite meal for dinner. But Christmas was really special in the store. People would come, and back then they sold 5-pound boxes of candy. It wasn't Russell Stover. It was there was a Leo Lieber and Brock's, I think, and there were different brands. And our parents would get more bulk type candies in for Christmas time and that. So and people would come in and actually just make a deposit on their box of candy, and my mother would write their name on the end of the box, and then Christmas Eve they would come and they'd put orders in for produce. Came down out of Philadelphia. We had a delivery man called Jaime that would bring the winter produce in, and so they would order their oranges or apples or whatever they were going to have for their Christmas celebrations. So our store was open real late on Christmas Eve, because after people put their children to bed, they'd come to collect what they had laid in for their treats for Christmas. So I just lost my train of thought, so I don't know.
Were there any other special holidays?
But on this Christmas holiday, it was really special. My parents had a little tablet. It was like a 3x5 notes. And people that couldn't really afford to pay for their groceries when they came to buy them, my mother would write their names on there and how much, and just keep tallying it up. And at the end of the week, when they got their check from whatever their job was, they would come and pay. And sometimes they couldn't always pay the full amount. She just deducted, and that was just a running little tab. But then, as the accounts weren't paid for a long time, and maybe the families would move away or really get on hard times, she would move those debts over into a composition book like we would use in school, and many times they were never paid. But I felt like my parents were the welfare department before there was such a thing. So Christmas time, if they would come in, and they have bought their groceries, and she knew they were going through hard times, if it had been a bad harvest season or whatever, there'd always be an extra box of candy in their box of groceries when they got home. So that to me was special. As far as our Christmas trees had character. My dad would take us, his birthday was December 6th, so we would go to my paternal grandparents, and cousins would play, and those that wanted to go along could go out in the woods to find a woods pine. There was no greater smell than a woods pine. I can still smell the Christmas tree to this day. And but the shape was not like they are. They had not been pruned like out at these Christmas tree farms nowadays. So, and I can still remember that we bring it home, and it would sit outside in a bucket in water, and then Christmas Eve, Santa would decorate the tree. When we went to bed, there was no evidence that Christmas was going to be tomorrow. And after they had closed the store and everybody had gotten their candy and gone home, then Santa had come to our house sometime between then and 5 o'clock in the morning. And I can still remember coming down the stairs and smelling that pine tree. And the dining room would have a box of those candies and a bowl of nuts that you shell out yourself, and a bowl of fruit on the table. And we might have, a toy under the tree that wasn't wrapped. We might have some clothing that was wrapped, but nothing like what we see today. But it was still beyond, you just tried to imagine it. The 4th of July, you might come down the stairs and just imagine what it was that Christmas morning.
That's neat. How is Middletown today, besides all the things you've talked about, different from what it was like when you were a child? How has the community changed? You've seen a lot of changes.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think I'm going by my mother's experience. In 1992, the state highway actually took their property to widen the road to, make room for all these cars and that were now coming. And so they were relocated. And that was the hardest thing for my mother when they were relocated to a small development. Providentially, it was only a half mile from our house, and we didn't know that my dad was going to be bedridden for 3.5 years. So they were just like half mile away. I could get there several times a day to them. But when they got relocated there, it was such a cultural shock to them because they lived in a store where people were coming and going every day. And when she got there, she said, I see people go out in the morning and I see them come home at night, but you just don't know your neighbors. Mm-hmm. And it was the same with my in-laws. When they moved there in 1943 on their farm, there on, it's called Pole Bridge Road, just east of Boyd's Corner off of 13. And when they moved there, the neighbors came and said, I'll help you get up your hay if you can lend a hand when we kill our turkeys in the fall. So the farmers would get together and they'd do their work together. My husband's parents would go over and kill hogs with them, and they'd make sausage and prepare for the winter. And so neighbors help neighbors that way. I don't know that, maybe in some of the developments they're like that. I'm lucky that I still live on the farm with my husband's 3 sisters are there. So we have our own little community and, support one another that way. So for me, it hasn't really changed that much, but I think for others, maybe it has, that have moved here from other places and that.
Considering that we're celebrating, and this I want you to really talk about, we're about to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our country this year. What stories have come down through your family, your parents, your grandparents, or your more distant ancestors? You were talking earlier about the fact that your family has been here for 11 generations. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I wish I knew more about, where they have, come from and moved to, but I do know that some research has been done, and a cousin, a distant cousin, has written a book about Sapiens Harris and how that there was some conflict about whether the area around Towns End, the Dexter Corner area, whether it belonged to Lord Calvert in Maryland or whether it belonged to whoever was settling here in Delaware. And so, and just how, things have changed so much with, just how they lived, back then, and just all that they had to face. In our own family, as he had done that history, and I finally found out, because I always thought Appoquinimink, our ancestors just went down, they got off a boat in Odessa, because that's where my great-grandparents lived. So I didn't really know a lot about that they actually lived, further out. But then in doing that and researching on my dad's side, my paternal great-grandfather actually, and I think about the immigrant conflicts or controversies that are going on now, but my great-grandfather actually stowed away on a boat from Germany when he disagreed with the war in the 1830s. And he came in at Fleming's Landing this is oral history that's been handed down, that he served as an indentured servant on a farm. but he was later able to purchase a farm, but it was in the same area where the Harrises had been in the 1700s, that he's now there in the 1800s. And I've been able to trace where they had several children, and several were buried there in a cemetery that's now been abandoned. It was a Methodist church there that was later torn down in the 1900s. And but then I found the obituary, and when my great-grandfather Henry Schaefer passed away, this stowaway on this boat from Germany, it said that he was a prominent farmer. So I don't know, he did not come through Ellis Island, so maybe I'm an illegal. So I have mercy on whoever's out there.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting when your history goes back that far, your family history.
To think hundreds of years and just how they,
From the very beginning.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know if any of them served in the Revolutionary War? Do you have any knowledge of that?
Yes, I believe there are, because this cousin that had written the book says that, I could, apply to be in the Daughters of American Revolution, but I've never, pursued that. And on my husband's side, they had been here for quite some time as well, yeah. But I don't know, I haven't done the research to say exactly who it was or that.
Well, that's exciting. Are there any stories about famous, well, you just told us some, stories about famous or infamous relatives in your family? Did anybody step outside the bounds?
Oh, I don't think that we have any claims to fame.
Okay.
No. I guess the closest thing, my mother had a cousin that was a pilot in the World War II and fought in the European theater, and was a pilot, and so he would have many stories to tell us that and my mother actually served during World War II on the St. George's Bridge, because they thought the bridges were something to really be guarded, and so they would have night watchmen, to go sit and see if they saw any activity of planes flying in or whatnot. She says, I don't know what I would have done if I had seen anything. And of course, they don't have the communication like we do now.
Run.
Right, yeah, right, exactly.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, your family has done a lot for this country. Your dad served, your uncle served, your uncle, I think you said it was.
My mother's cousin. We always called him Uncle, yeah, yeah.
Are there any special heirlooms, photos, Bibles, or other memorabilia stuff you remember that have been passed down in your family?
I have the Bible that came through the Schaefer family. I don't know if it was brought from Germany or whether it was one that my great-grandfather started here. But I don't know that there's really.
Your cousin that did the history.
Yeah, I had a very few pictures. Back then there weren't a lot of people that had cameras, and I was able to find a picture of this distant cousin that had written the book of his mother when she was a little girl, and so he was able to do a photo crop of it and do some magic on that and all, but yeah, there aren't a lot of pictures.
What was the full name of your spouse, and describe him for me? More than just he had brown hair.
Right, George Marvin Davis, and my husband, as I say, grew up on a farm. But back we only lived 5 miles apart, but we didn't know each other, even though our parents did. And he used to stop at my parents' store on his way home. He took a job off of the farm. He graduated from Gunning Bedford High School, and he worked with his dad on the farm for a year after high school. But it was either he's going to have to go to Goldie Beacom or do something else, because on a 140-acre farm, his parents were looking down the road that it wouldn't support multiple families. So his uncles had taken jobs at the Chrysler Corporation building Army tanks. And then my husband graduated from high school in 1963, and so they were doing a lot of hiring in 1964. Things were really picking up in the car industry. So they encouraged him to put an application in, and he was hired right off. And so, and he also signed up to in the National Guard to serve. It was, of course, the time of the Vietnam War, and he didn't know whether his unit would be called up for that as well. So he did take a little leave from Chrysler to do his boot camp and that training, the basic training that you would get in the Army. So fast forward, while I was in Goldie Beacom, my grandmother became ill and wasn't able to help in the store as much. So he would stop on his way home from Chrysler Corporation to buy the family newspaper and whatnot. And so that is how we met. It took him many months, if not year, to anyway ask me out for a date. So that's how we met. And his name was Marvin, and I was so pleased because everybody in our family was George. And on our first date, I found out his name is really George Marvin, and so the rest is history.
That's funny.
But anyway, he worked at Chrysler for 36 years, and loved, but still loved farming. We couldn't wait to build a house on the farm. His parents were so gracious, gave each one of the children, the 3 daughters and the son, an acre to build a house on.
So you ended up on the farm.
So we're back in the farm.
You did this one. Where and when did you get married? And was it a big family day?
It was a big family day. We actually, he went to church with his parents in Odessa Methodist Church. I was at Summit Methodist Church, but our pastor, it was back like when they had circuit riders, like one pastor would have 2 and sometimes 3 churches. So our pastor was also the pastor of Bethesda Church right on Main Street in Middletown. And of course it was a larger congregation, larger facility. And when we got married, of course, my parents, having the store, wanted to invite everybody that came to the store, and the families were big on both sides. So we got married at Bethesda Church in Middletown. And of course, people came from, that I worked with at Hercules and Wilmington and all. But the interesting thing is we had a reception right in the fellowship hall downstairs. It's a 2-story building. And our mothers did all the food. Both mothers made potato salad. My mother-in-law used the stainless steel milk cans to make all the iced tea, and the women from Summit Church served. And and had a local woman, Davis, made the wedding cake, but she wasn't related. But anyway, so it was nothing like now. When my parents got married in 1949, their wedding reception was in the Methodist Church on High Street in Odessa, and they had cut brick ice cream and a wedding cake and punch for their reception. Nothing like the receptions that we see where they go to these venues and such things as nowadays. Quite different. And my in-laws actually got married by my mother-in-law's uncle was a pastor, and they just went to Darlington, Maryland, and got married by her uncle, and came back and went to work the next day on the farm.
No party or no?
No, with the grandparents and all. Yeah. The biggest thing they had the next time that they went to there was an organization called The Grange, which is a farm co-op, like a cooperative or social, I guess, and they get together to, for different programs. I know the Delaware Grange still serves for fundraiser at the state fair. They serve their dinners and lunches there. So they went to their first Grange meeting after they were married, and they came in with a wheelbarrow full of presents, and so it was like a shower for them when they got married. And so it were just useful things, tea towels and such things. Again, nothing like what we would see nowadays.
What did your family enjoy doing together? You said earlier that they didn't really go many places because they were working in the store.
Right. Sometimes on Sunday afternoon, they would go down to Taylor's Bridge fishing. But many times by then my grandmother's health had failed, so I would always kind of stay home with grandmom and keep her company and that. But we would go down to my grandmother Schaefer's a lot on Sunday afternoons, and all the cousins would be there. And one of the big things was, even though we lived at a store and we sold ice cream cones all the time, when we went to my paternal grandmother's, well, we would churn our homemade ice cream one Sunday afternoon, and we'd get out. We had a little wagon that I remember that was full of straw, and we tilted it like it was a sliding board, and we would just have all kinds of adventures. Again, I said they didn't have indoor plumbing, so we would go and sit in the outhouse and tell all kinds of ghost stories and try to scare each other to death. And so, it was just a lot of outdoor fun things. But I do remember going and spending a week in the summer with the paternal grandparents, and they would be busy getting ready to go to King Street Market. And they would kill poultry, and so we would get to, this is like, it was work, but we thought it was fun to pluck the chickens, like to do the chicken feathers and that. And I remember one time they were all busy outside getting the flowers from the garden cut and bunched up to take to market, and the produce and that. So it must have been someone's birthday, and so Grandmom Schaefer thought, well, she can make a cake, so she sent my cousin and I in the house to make a cake and to make icing for it. My cousin was, 6 years older than I am, and she didn't know any more than I did. Well, the icing, it was so runny that it just ran off the cake. We didn't have a recipe.
Did you end up eating it?
They ate the cake. I'm sure they ate the cake. Nothing went to waste down there. But it was just so much fun. But my grandmother would take time to play. She taught us card games and that, and so we always had a lot of fun. And I can remember, though, I was used to milk that was, we didn't always drink the milk that my dad had. He shipped it to Pet Milk. But when we went there, they didn't have any store-bought milk like we had from the store. So that cream and what would sit right up on it, and they had those chickens that they raised, and the gravy, it would have grease like a half-inch on it. So I always lost my appetite. But I remember this one summer after I probably hadn't eaten for 3 days. Back then they didn't have it like pizza like they do nowadays. You ate what was there. Well, the one night she fixed, they had summer apples, and she made boiled apple dumplings. I can just remember that so vividly. That was the best meal I ever ate.
I bet it was good.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. You talked about working at Hercules. Talk to me about what you did there and why you chose that job.
Oh, I don't think I chose the job at Hercules. It chose me, I guess, because when you graduated from Goldie Beacom, they were always very helpful in getting you a job. So I just went for one interview and started on Monday, and it was in accounts payable. And back then, it was, of course, computers were just, this is 1970, and the computer room took up one whole floor in the Hercules building. And so we had these spreadsheets that, were the ledgers that you had to, verify the payments that were coming through. The different plants would send in their invoices, to be paid, and then you had to, compare it to the computer printouts and that. So I worked in with like 4 or 5 other ladies in that same department. That's how many bills there were to be paid. I think I had the first part of the alphabet, A to D, where the companies, and they would call and say, "Where's our money?" And I'd have to call the plant and say, "Where's your, the invoice, and did you get the materials and that?" So it was, got to talk to a lot of people from around the country and all, but I never really went. Sometimes we'd go on vacation, we'd ride by a location. I remember there was one in Radford, Virginia that was a subsidiary, and it was a company-owned plant, but government operated. So, and located like on the New River, and so my mother-in-law's family was all from that area. They came up here during the Depression. There was no work down in that area, and it was Southwest Virginia, where she came from, and her father came up here and got a job in the clay yard up around Corner Ketch, and he came without the family to see if there would be work up here. There were some other relatives that had come north to find work because times were so hard, and he said, "Well, I'll have to go back and get my family," and he made a phone call, and they said, "Don't let him come back, he'll never leave here if he comes home." So they put them on a truck, they said, that looked like from the Beverly Hillbillies, with all their belongings on the back of this truck that was probably not even roadworthy. And I believe at that point there were 7 children in there, and they came to Delaware. And they lived in a little tenant house.
What accomplishments are you most proud of? Of all the amazing things you've done, what are you most proud of?
I don't really have anything to be proud of, but I've been so blessed with 2 sons.
That's something big to be proud of.
And a wonderful husband.
You're going to make me cry, so I'm going to go on to the next thing. How has the recent development affected the area? From the Middletown you knew
Oh, yeah.
in your years growing up to the Middletown of today, is it a positive? What are your feelings about all of that change that has occurred?
Well, I try to look at it in a positive way. The people are, coming here, for a better life for their families, just as our families did back then. There's part of me that just, has a heart for the life that we've had. And but I just hope that as people move here, that they'll be able to experience, the same things that we did in some way or another.
What do you want people to know the most about yourself, your family, their business? Something in particular around farming or the community that was built around your store?
Yeah, it's just a wonderful community that, everyone looked after everyone else, just had a heart for, making someone else's life easier.
What do you want people to know the most about Middletown's past? Not necessarily yours or your family's, but having seen all the changes over the years, what would you like people to know about Middletown's past?
I'm just really stumped on that one. I just, just from a personal thing, just have so, many memories of, what it was like. Recently, I had the opportunity to, to see a couple plays, and it just, you can just always relate to just like each, I don't know, I'm just at a blank on this one, really.
Okay, that's it. That's all the questions.
Oh, wow.
You did an amazing job.
Well, no, I wish I could do better on that last one. Do a retake on that.
We could edit it in.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to add?
No. Oh, my goodness.
Do you want
There's
to go
just
back and talk about your sons since you
there's
got a
just
little
so much.
emotional
Oh
there?
yeah, right. I just try to think, so much. I think about, my mother, growing up and all, and my grandmother, just their oral histories, what they went through. Like my grandmother had that boarding house in Marcus Hook during the pandemic of 1918, and one of the ones that passed was her sister-in-law. I just remember all the stories, that she told, and just thinking about her mother dying when she was 8 years old, and that she became she had an older sister that just, I guess, her story, just read books and went off, was sent to Philadelphia to a normal school, to become a nurse and that. And so my grandmother just she made all her own clothes and was just there with her dad and cooked at such an early age. I can't imagine 8-year-olds doing what my grandmother did, nowadays. I guess that, that would be one thing that I would think about, as far as the people that live here now, didn't have, not that it's good to have those experiences, but to be able to, experience some of those things.
Have you seen the culture in Middletown change? Have you noticed that, felt that?
Oh, absolutely. People coming from so many different cultures. And yet I notice when I go out and walk, I like to walk in the neighborhood next to us because it's safer than walking on Polbridge Road with all the traffic now. And as I walk through this development, one thing that I've noticed is people that don't look like I do. When I grew up, everybody more or less looked the same. But now we have people, from countries all around the world, and they look different than we do, that sometimes they're the ones that are most friendly to say, hi, how are you? Or, that. Not that, I have conversations, I'm walking and, that. But if someone's out, I noticed the last time that I took a walk, that a young man that looked very different than I was the one that made an effort to say hello to this old lady that was walking through his neighborhood, So, I think that's interesting. But just to be able to, I think that would be my hope, to just be able to meet our neighbors and to share our experiences, because I'm sure that there's so much we can learn from each other.